I'm Luke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is Mixed to Tape,
the podcast where we talk about audio, from recording to mastering and everything else in between.
We're here to start discussions and help answer your questions.
Let's get started.
Hello, Tyler.
Hey, Luke.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a Thursday evening. All is well. I had to end up getting a full set of tires for our minivan today, which was a great surprise, a really nice surprise.
Because your tires were suddenly all broken?
Well, yeah, little did I know. So my wife pulled into our driveway, and I met her outside, and I heard hissing, and I was like, you have a flat tire. It's losing air. And so I tried to find the hole, and it was on the inside sidewall. And so I pulled the tire off, and the whole sidewall on the inside of the wheel was like deteriorating.
Oh my God.
So
all right.
Luckily it started losing air while she was in our driveway and not, going 70 miles down the highway.
Yeah.
But other than that, all is well.
That's good.
How's everything going with you?
It's nice. Wife just had her birthday, so drove her to a museum, which was largely my kid's idea.
Dude, that's what kids are for.
Yeah. But,
what are we doing for Mom's birthday?
Yeah. But it was fun. We all love museums, and had a nice day. I made her a tart made out of cheese and cream cheese and tomatoes, and it was actually really good. So, I'm not much of a baker. I dropped the pie at one point, the tart or whatever. So it was a mess.
But a delicious mess.
It was a delicious mess, yes. We should introduce ourselves.
Why don't you start, Luke?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Luke. I am a freelance recording and editing engineer. I also teach audio at Ithaca College to freshmen and sophomores. I work live sound in the area. I've worked in film, jazz, classical, kind of whatever. I, of course, came from the city, which is kind of where you and I both met. We both worked at Avatar in New York City for a long time as assistants and production assistants and things like that. So that's my resume.
Yeah, let's see. If I want to go back, I'm from New York originally, from the Catskill region. I moved to the city and attended the Institute of Audio Research when I was about 17. Got my first internship after that at a small studio called Manhattan Beach Recording, which is not the Manhattan Beach in California. And we did mostly like off-Broadway cast albums and cabaret there. And it was a great place to learn like the foundation and like the functioning of a professional recording studio. But it was a great place to like make mistakes. And I was there for about a year, and then I got hired at Avatar. Worked there for about 6 years, left the studio, and moved to the Hudson Valley in 2016. From there, I got hired as a music coordinator for Sesame Street, and that's my main gig. And I do work on other children's shows and movies and other TV shows, movies and commercials. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing these days.
Who of us, when we were kids, thought, when I grow up, I'm going to be working on this show that I'm watching right now?
Not me.
I used to have dreams that I would work on Star Trek. I really wanted to know how the phasers worked. So, this podcast, this thing, we're making a podcast together.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us what this podcast is about?
So this podcast, we want to get younger, less experienced engineers and more engaged. So like the students, the audio fledglings, hobbyists, really anyone who has an interest in audio engineering, who's just starting out. We want to focus on educating folks and kind of have it be less topical. And this is going to be a place where you can feel secure about asking any audio-related questions. As Carl Sagan once said, There are naive questions, tedious questions, ill-phrased questions, questions put after inadequate self-criticism, but every question is a cry to understand the world. There is no such thing as a dumb question.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. So yeah, that's kind of what it's about. Learning, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really want to emphasize that this is meant to be about, it's a safe place for people to learn and for you to ask those questions that you're too afraid to ask because, well, I mean, no matter what, we're never going to out you. So, but everybody comes into this from, different walks of life and from different experience levels. And we are hoping to create a source of information. Yeah. I think you said this all very well. So, for our topic today, we talked about it. We thought it would be best to start with a discussion about internships, looking for internships. We can talk about how you and I both got our internships. We had quite a few internships, I think, before we both landed at Avatar.
I had just one.
You had just one. Oh, okay.
Just
so
one,
I had two. So 2-ish, 3-ish. And then talk about our experience there.
Let's do it.
So why don't you go first?
Sure. So I got my first internship right out of audio engineering school. You kind of do like the mass resume sending to all of the studios with your very basic resume, which is like, I completed school and these are the things that I can do, which like you and everybody else, everyone else's resumes look the same. So anyway, this place in Manhattan Beach called me back and said, hey, do you want to come intern here? And so I ended up interning there. And it was, like I said in the intro, it was a smaller studio. We did like cabaret and off-Broadway records, but it was like, serious enough where you were learning how studios functioned, but, if you made a big mistake, it wasn't the end of the world. Like this one time, after I got hired, I had one of the external clocks set to the wrong sample rate than all the other ones, and then, which caused a huge, 8 tracks were playing back at the wrong speed, essentially, so.
Oh, lovely.
So then after that, that place closed, and
because of your clocking issue.
Yeah, it was totally my fault. So after they closed, and one of the engineers that I worked with there said, "Hey, I really like working with you. I can talk to the manager at Avatar and see if you can get an internship there." So she, gave the manager my name, and I started working there as an intern in about 2010, and yeah.
So did you apply, or did this person just like talk to the manager and then?
She talked to the manager, and I sent him my resume, but it was still at that point very a small resume.
Okay.
And pretty much the interview at Avatar was like, okay, this is the internship. It's 40 hours a week unpaid. Do you mind cleaning toilets? So I said yes. No, I didn't mind cleaning toilets.
Yes, you said no.
And so
I
got
love it.
hired as an intern. Yeah. So, yeah, that's how those were my first 2 internships, and yeah. So right off the bat, and my short career at that point was just like, you have to be able to know how to do something to get hired for a job. But like, I knew this one engineer, and she got me in at Avatar. So you never know who's going to help you out later down the road. So
yeah, I look back on my illustrious career, but no, seriously, I look back on kind of every gig I think I've ever worked, and it was every gig I've ever gotten was because I knew somebody. Yeah. Every job I've ever gotten is because I knew somebody. It was about that network.
Right.
So I actually had a crazy internship experience. Kind of looking back on it now, I realized just how many I did. I worked for a live sound company in Baltimore, and that turned into a full-time job, and it was great. But then I graduated school and I left, and I moved to New York City, so that job was no more. While I was also in Baltimore, I got an internship at a post-production house, And that was a very standard internship, I would call it, for like a small studio kind of vibe. You come in, you do the cleaning and the dishes and the things like that, and then you just like hang out with the engineers and they show you stuff all day. And
Right.
it was like that. Like I think it was like 1 or 2 days a week or something. But that was great. I still have good relationships with those people. Taught me a lot about video post production, which actually turned out to be really helpful.
Yeah.
When I moved to the city, I did the standard door to door thing. The like go to every studio and give them your resume like they tell you to.
Yeah.
I remember I went to Electric Lady and dropped my thing off there. And I think I had an interview. I can't remember. I remember going to Sear, and I actually had to sneak in. I don't know. I didn't know what to do. I knew Sear was through that door, but there was a buzzer and they weren't expecting me. So I did the really shady wait for somebody to come out thing, and then I walked in. And I tried to look really official about it so that it wouldn't look suspicious. And I got in the elevator and realized I had no idea where I was going. And so I just started hitting buttons. And I ended up hitting the button that took me directly to Roberta. She was standing right there. And so I gave her my resume and we talked for a little bit about the internship. And so whatever. And I do remember going to Avatar, and I remember handing my resume to one of the production assistants who was sitting at the desk, who I would eventually know this production assistant. We would become friends later, right? But I handed him my resume, and I have no idea if that ever made it to the studio manager.
It must have.
No. So this is a very long story. It's turning into. So anyway, I keep calling around, and I get an internship at Threshold Studios, which was this tiny little studio in Midtown, known for like taking small bands and like producing them and making them really, really great and big bands. And these bands would go on signed to be great bands. And I interned there for 1 day, and it was great. It was a very good experience. But in that meantime, I had also written one more email to the studio manager as another Hail Mary of like, look, here's my deal. Here's my resume.
The studio manager at Avatar?
At Avatar, yes.
Yeah.
And I have a letter of recommendation from this engineer, and suddenly I get a call, and he's like, hey, come on in. So he talks to me. He's like, can you start working tomorrow? And it was like, oh, okay. And so suddenly there I was.
Is that why your other internship was only 1 day?
Yes.
Okay.
I went back for like a second day, and I was talking to their engineer, and I was like, what do you think I should do? And he was like, well, it's going to be a very different vibe. They're not really going to let you in the room at first. I was just hanging out with them. I was like hanging out and talking to the band and stuff, and setting up microphones like on day one.
Yeah.
And I mean, at Avatar, I think it was a year before anybody would let me touch the microphones,
Right. Yeah, that was the vibe with my first internship, which I ended up getting hired at. It was just like my first day, I was like running cables and like I didn't know what the heck I was doing, I knew like just enough to get myself in trouble. And then so after Avatar, that was like your last internship, and then you got, okay.
Yeah, and I finally have gleaned enough experience now where I
Don't have to work for free.
I don't need the internship anymore. Think about like big picture internships. If you were to have your own studio and you wanted to create a really great internship program, what would you do?
What would I do? I would have, I think kind of the same structure that Avatar did, have like your production assistants or your general assistants be training your interns, have everything very clear of like your day-to-day duties, what's expected of you. That should also include time in the rooms, being able to read manuals, learning how each room is hooked up and like where all the tie lines are, even though you're not going to be doing that kind of work. I mean, I think an internship should be a lot more than just cleaning and running out for coffee. You're there to learn about how this part of the music business works. Yeah, I think that's what I would do. Yeah.
So you want to create like pipeline for like you want to create a system where your interns are getting educated and have the option, have the ability to move up the ranks
Yeah, absolutely.
over a
Yeah.
certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think,
And I wouldn't be like, I don't think it would be so quite cut and dry where it's like, okay, your internship is 2 months and then that's it. And either I'm going to hire you or not. I'm not going to be, I wouldn't be stringing people along, for years as an intern. But also if it's not working out, I'd have to let you go at some point. But the hope is to the person catch on to, how the studio works and be passionate about this type of work. And, hopefully it works out because it takes a lot of time and energy to train new people, when they walk in the door for the first day.
yeah, I think having some sort of time limit on an internship program is like a massive green flag for
Yeah,
me.
for sure.
Like, so at Avatar, the system, at least when I entered, it was a 3-month internship. And at the end of 3 months, they either cut you loose or they hired you or promoted you to production assistant, where, as I describe it to my students, I was a king intern. But really, your job is to, as a production assistant in our case, which is similar to the general assistant at other studios, is managing the studio, the building, really. You were responsible for the processing stuff coming in and processing stuff going out, taking care of clients as they were coming in and going out. But there was an expectation of sort of self-education at Avatar, which I really, 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 really liked.
Yeah.
And I definitely find that at some studios, and I also notice the lack of that at some studios. There are some studios that I can think of that aren't really interested in their interns learning. They're interested more in, are their interns like silent?
Right.
And can they clean something? I mean, I don't know. Anybody can clean something.
Right.
So I guess the flip side of this is like some of the internship red flags that you or I have seen or encountered. I'm happy to say that all of my internships I think were very positive. My internship at the live sound company was paid, and of course, minimum wage, whatever. But it was paid, and their thing there was, there's this big company with this big warehouse. You tell us what you want to do, and you can do it. What do you want to learn? You're here, like let's get you interested. Do you want to go out on gigs? Okay, let's get you in the warehouse. Let's get you wrapping cables, and then let's get you familiar enough that you know that kind of stuff. Are you interested in electronics? Great, let's get you in the shop. We have tons of consoles.
Yeah.
So they had a whole speaker testing program, and I worked there for a while, and eventually I had to take that over. Very different experience than Avatar. Avatar was much more, at least for the intern thing, it was a lot of let's get the cleaning down first.
Right.
And if you show us that you can get the cleaning stuff down, then we know that we can trust you with some of these bigger things.
Right.
And so that was a little bit frustrating. I mean, I think it was frustrating for anybody going through that, but eventually you put your head down, you get through it. And it was great, and it was worth it. And, plenty of assistance. We all put our heads down at one point, and then, you sort of show that you can do it, and you end up getting into studios. What do you think would be some red flags if you were applying?
Back when I started, if that's all you were doing was just cleaning, all day, and there was no room for learning, then that would be a huge red flag. Not being able to go into the rooms with a production assistant or general assistant and, push some faders and switches and stuff and learn how the rooms work. I think that would be, if you weren't allowed to do that, that would be a huge red flag. I think you mentioned before, hiding from clients.
Yeah.
I think that's, you shouldn't, it takes people to run a studio, and I think that it's great to be able to see all the people that it takes, to make it happen, even if you are just getting someone coffee or something, but also on that note, I feel like there is a time to stop and chat with somebody in the hallway, and maybe when there isn't, But I think those are my red flags. What about you?
Yeah, I guess I'd describe it more in like the general, like, does the person in charge seem interested in your education? You
Yeah.
know, the agreement of an internship, in at least from my perspective, is we are either getting you for free or for dirt cheap. So you should be getting something out of this too. If
Yeah.
the attitude of the studio is like, you, the intern, should just be thankful that you even were let in the doors here,
Right.
that can lead to some abuse.
Yeah.
I know people in the industry who worked as an intern at some studios, and the studio was demanding like 40 hours a week of work. You weren't allowed inside the rooms. You weren't allowed to like talk to the engineers. You weren't allowed to assist on sessions or like help set up anything. You were expected to clean the building, lug around people's gear, and then like hide for the rest of the day until you were called.
Right.
Yeah, that's like a huge red flag to me.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to say like a red flag is if you're not being paid. But honestly, that still happens these days. It doesn't happen that frequently.
Yeah. I think I feel like nowadays, if you're not getting paid, you really have to be getting a lot out of that internship. You know?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I think that's a good qualifier is if you're not getting paid, yeah. It's like what the experience that you're getting is like cannot be replicated anywhere else.
Yeah. Or like once, you're trustworthy enough to be in the rooms, like you can use those rooms if there's nobody in them, kind of a
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
you know?
That's something that I see at a lot of studios that I actually I really like. And it goes back to that education thing that we talk about. Is the studio interested in your education? And one of the best measures of that is like, is there an expectation that you will be bringing people in?
Right.
I interviewed at a studio down, I guess it would be closer to downtown in Manhattan, and they told me in the interview that there was an expectation that I would be bringing in bands like late at night, and we would be recording, and I think that's great.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, for sure.
Because I look at my students now. I can assign all kinds of homework where you follow a worksheet and things like that, and memorize things for a final or whatever. I think one of the best homework assignments that I give them is one that requires them to simply record and mix a song. I've had so much feedback, positive feedback from it. That's like,
Yeah.
wow, I learned a lot. Like,
Yeah. It shows like all like holes in your knowledge and not being able to get something to work, and how you learned how you figured out how to get it working. It's a huge learning experience.
Yeah, sure.
It's a
Troubleshooting.
journey. It's a whole journey. Yeah.
Yeah. And even more than that, it's like some of the really basic, like the number one response I get from every student, because I have them write up a response, they say, man, I really wish I had given myself more time. I can't teach that. But that's something that they learned organically.
Right.
So, circling back to the internship thing, if your studio if they want you to record in the studios, if they want you to bring in bands, and quite frankly, if they're expecting you to bring in bands, I think that is great. And honestly, even if it's an unpaid internship, that's a pretty solid get.
Yeah, for sure.
I
think that benefits everybody too.
Yeah.
It benefits the studio, as long as you're not breaking things. You can find issues with gear that's not working properly,
Yeah.
before like a big session comes in and they need that thing working. And then I think the studio can rely on you more to do more work, get more comfortable in the rooms and work your way up the ranks,
Yeah. And even the bringing the band in gets your studio some street cred, even
Yeah.
if this band is small. But
Right.
maybe one day they'll be big.
Right.
It's also worth saying all my students have to go through an internship program as part of the degree, and none of them are paid. So of course, their payment is their experience.
Yeah.
But we work very hard to make sure that they are placed in studios that will give them a lot of good experience and things like that.
Yeah.
By and large, I think our students have a pretty positive experience with their internship placements.
And is that internship, is it a minimum amount of hours that they have to do?
I think so. It's at least a minimum amount of time. They typically do it over the summer, so it's a 3-month internship.
Gotcha. I see.
A lot of those internships, of course, will turn into jobs, and that's always good, and that's always positive too.
Yep.
So I think to summarize, green flags. Green flags are interest in your education as an intern, as a worker. Theoretically, some sort of system that like gets you in the streamline into the studio.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how common that is, but if you can find that, that is great. That's massive green flag. Conversely, if you have a studio just trying to sap as much free work out of you as they possibly can,
And then kick you to the curb.
and worse, string you along,
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
or kick you to the curb. Yeah, just cycle through interns every 3 months or so. That seems like a big red flag to me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then I think just overall, a green flag for me is just summarizing, just a friendly atmosphere, where just learning is encouraged.
Yeah, things were fairly intense at Avatar, but learning was definitely encouraged, and I always really respected that.
Yeah.
And I
It was
think
expected, I think, really.
it was expected, and
Yeah.
I don't know. There was almost a competitive nature to it. It wasn't in any way like cruel, but we were always just trying to see how much we could learn. It felt like, and that was always really exciting. We would get so excited about new keyboard shortcuts,
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, just a new way to patch something around. Or
Yeah.
hey, look what I figured out how to do. That's
And
what
you're
this does.
And you have all these assistants crowding around, like, whoa, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the one assistant who's like, well, why don't you do it this way? And it was like, and they do it in half the work. It's
Right.
like, oh, yeah.
You always need a workaround, though.
Yeah. Always need the workaround. So I think this sort of wraps up our first podcast.
Yeah. Great.
Moving forward, we are very interested in hearing back from all of you. We are interested in hearing your questions, in talking to you, and sort of having a sort of discussion, a discussion that happens here on the podcast, and hopefully one that happens at least a little bit online. We have a Facebook page, an Instagram, all called Mix to Tape Podcast. We also have a Patreon. If you like what we do and you want to support us, we would really appreciate your support. That's at Patreon, the Mix to Tape Podcast. We have a few different tiers of support that are all listed on the webpage, ranging from the simple, here's a little bit of money to support us, to support what Tyler and I are doing, to a little bit higher. We will give you a shout out at the end of the podcast for certain tiers. And for the higher tiers, we will give you preference for your questions. There are also a few other ideas that Tyler and I have been cooking up. We're sort of waiting to see how this podcast goes, how it progresses, how our audience, how our listeners react to certain things. And we'll be implementing some additional features for our Patreon supporters as we go forward. If you like what we're doing here, if you like what you hear, please tell your friends. Have them search Mix to Tape or Mix to Tape Podcast. We should be on every major podcast platform I think this wraps up our first podcast.
All right. We'll see you next time.
We'll see ya.